Well, hello. I am Kimberly HayDay,
I'm Amanda Day,
and you're listening to Fundraising Heyday
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
and how we can all do a better job, and we all should. Every one of us. Don't stick your head in the sand because we can all do a better job of changing the world through fundraising.
Yep, and Patreon subscribers get these episodes early.
What?
So we're so glad that you're here. If you are loving this space, we think you would fit perfectly into the Heyday community we are building through our newsletter. Every Friday, we show up in your inbox with a blog post, typically related to grants and fundraising, a book review, because have you met us, and a hot take about grants and the world at large. Hence the name of our newsletter, the Heyday Hot Takes.
And if you're already subscribing, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate the feedback that you give us. And thanks for that. But if you're new to this or thinking maybe I want to be a part of this, all you got to do is go to our website, haydayservices.com. That's HayDay services.com. There's a subscription link at the very bottom of the page and at the top of every page you might visit on our site. It's also a great way to keep up with where we're training, what webinars we're giving, any other events we may be leading. And we just show up very quietly and demurely in your email box every Friday morning. So, hey, it's free, it's there. Read some good books, find our hot takes. It's all there at HayDay Hot Takes. So you can go to, again, haydayservices.com and subscribe.
You can. So, after a quick word from our sponsor, we'll be back with an information packed session about the best data sources that grant writers can use when developing their need statement. We're going to cover everything from demographics to healthcare to crime statistics. It's one episode you're certainly going to want to bookmark, so stay tuned.
We are thrilled that SNF Writing Solutions is our podcast sponsor for the second half of season 8. Also, season 8, what? Wow. So founder and CEO Stacy Fitzsimmons holds a Master's of Business Administration where her thesis focused on strategic planning and culture change. Combined with her 20 plus years of experience as a project management and grant professional, with a federal grant win rate of 70%, she has learned more than a thing or two about leadership, consulting, and taking calculated risks. So take a listen.
Stacy, as a follow up to our last episode where we talked about leadership, how do you recommend that grant professionals take a leadership position within their organization?
So I think here it's not necessarily about having that leadership position. It's really about having a leadership mindset and taking on roles within your organization that help promote your organization and the work that you need to get done. So, one, it's all about where are you personally and knowing where your strengths are as a professional and as how you fit within your organization. You know, if you don't have great speaking qualities, then maybe that's something you need to work on, or that's something that you communicate better in writing. So that's how you assert your leadership is through better writing. So is the first step is really assess where are you as a leader and how can you best communicate?
Mhm.
Because if you can't communicate, there's no way you can lead. And we all communicate every day, whether it's email or proposals, no matter what, we are communicating. But it's making sure that you communicate effectively. So, and another thing is to really put yourself in places where you can be influential in making the decisions that are going to affect you. And this sounds really selfish, but at the same time, that's how you're going to best be able to serve your organization is if you are able to not only promote your needs, but how those needs impact your organization. If you're at capacity, there's no way that you can serve your organization well and still take on more. So it's really trying to figure out how you can position yourself to advocate for yourself and your organization, but making sure that that organization is always top of mind. That's where leadership is.
Nice. To find out more about Stacy Fitzsimmons, SNF Writing Solutions, and her incredible offerings, visit snfwritingsolutions.com.
So today's episode is all about data sources for grant writers. And you may be like, that sounds exciting. Not, but
No.
trust.
Yes.
There's nothing more, and to my detriment, there's nothing more that I like than just hurling myself down a rabbit hole of research, whether it's grant writing, whether it's writing fiction. I love learning. Sometimes I can get so involved in it that I have to put the brakes on. So if that's not you and you want to find out, hey, are there any other websites or sources I could be adding to my arsenal of information about how to write grants, then that's what this episode is about. Lighter on the ranting, heavier on providing more information, particularly if you're working with writing needs statements for grants, right? And that's where you're talking about the needs of the population, the challenges faced by the communities your agency or your client's agency serves. It's where you make the case that there is an issue, right? And that we're talking about this and then making the connection as to why your organization is best suited to address that issue.
Yep. So if you're new to grants or you're looking for a refresher, know that the need statement should represent the needs of the community you're serving, whether that's you could be serving veterans or every resident who lives within the county where you're serving, or maybe it's dogs and cats that you're serving, right? But it's the needs of the community you're serving, not the needs of your agency. Okay. So not the, hey, we need more staff. Hey, we need more of this. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the needs of those you're serving. And what makes a need statement truly convincing is that data that demonstrates the scope and severity of the problem you're trying to address. So, but you've got to go and find data that is actually meaningful and trustworthy, right? So, Wikipedia is probably not the best place to start your data research.
Have I gone to Wikipedia for things? Sure, but not for grant research, or I might use it as a starting point to check out the references at the bottom. So yeah, we're not anti-free information sharing. It's just a matter of information that you can trust. So that's what we're getting at. And today we're focusing on some key areas. I know there's so many different kinds of programs out there. We're hitting the highlights of programs and services that tend to be larger in terms of funding opportunities. It's kind of where we're going here. So we're going to start out talking about information that everybody needs. Demographic, socioeconomic data. Then we're going to segue into health and human services style data, education, justice issues, particularly associated with crime, and then the environment. But big, fat, stinky caveat here today. Anytime we talk about federal sources for data, that information was there as of, the second week of May 2025. There have been enormous changes as the government has defunded critical and essential data sources and access to data and all kinds of things. So we're focusing on what is still available as of the time of this recording when we're talking about federal data.
Yeah. So let's start with most people consider the gold standard for demographic data, particularly in the United States, and that is the U.S. Census Bureau. We were very fortunate to interview Marilyn E. Stevens, who was or probably still is, a data dissemination specialist with the Census Bureau way back in season 6. And we're going to link that episode in the show notes. So if you want to take a deep dive into some of the stuff she taught us, that would be a great place to start. But for today's episode, Kimberly's got some great insights on how you can use census data.
You're too kind. I think I just have some things I can talk about. The people who are insightful are the people at the Census Bureau who are putting this information out there and continuing to get it out there. The main umbrella site to get started for all kinds of essential demographic information, socioeconomic information is the website census.gov. And there are just all kinds of wonderful things there. Just super quick overview. The census was usually done every 10 years. And then in between those 10-year increments, there are several different kinds of supplemental surveys, questionnaires, all different data that the census team gathers and puts out. We don't know. We don't know if there's going to be another census. If there was another census, it would be in 2030. So we're sort of at that halfway point. So just wanted to give you an overview of where that is and how it's selected, and that there are different measures between those giant decade super surveys where there's different kinds of information gathered in ways that's supportable in the statistical and the research community.
Yep. So another facet of the census website is their quick facts tools, which I'll tell you, that is, anytime I've got a new client, that is the first place I go, is that quick facts, because whether my client is a local government, whether they're a city or a county, or if they're a nonprofit that serves a certain area, it can be really helpful to get that kind of 30,000 level overview of understanding of who is even living in the community that they're serving. So it gives information such as population numbers, age distribution, race, ethnicity, housing, income, education, poverty levels, household income, all of that kind of stuff. And even if I'm not necessarily using all of that specific data in my needs statement, it helps me better understand, okay, are there high levels of poverty? What is the median household income? Is it higher or lower than what maybe the state or national averages are? So me getting a handle on that can help me when I'm talking about writing, particularly the need statement. So again, whether you are actually using that data, I highly recommend starting with the quick facts tool and getting that overview of the community.
Also, the census data is kind of the seminal data for a lot of other data sets that may be put out by private and even for pay kinds of services. So just know that. Just like when you're searching for grants, the information that a lot of the paid databases use is based off of 990s. So a lot of information that they're and I'm not saying they're bad things, but a lot of databases that offer more bells and whistles to search and create might use probably use census data as their baseline, and then they sort of overlay other things on top of it. So that's why Amanda always starts with the census data, kind of the primary source for a lot of this.
Yeah.
They also have a fantastic YouTube channel. Highly recommend. I may or may not have subscribed to it. Does that matter? No, but I'm just telling you, they always have the production quality is fine, and they walk you through things, and they also occasionally will update their the title eludes me. Census data for grant writers, I think is what it's called, something like that. And they do some shorts, but it's mainly longer form videos. Super helpful in helping you access all the different kinds of information, and it's free.
Yeah. So one other thing I'll say about the census website too is it really does amaze me. Like all of us know, yeah, they count things, right? So we know population and we know income levels and education, but they track all kinds of things. I used census data once for a grant for bicycle safety education because they had data for Metro Atlanta, which is where my project was taking place, to show that the number of people who were choosing to commute by bicycle versus car or mass transit had increased by like 320% over the past 10 years during the time frame I was working on that. And so that was a very powerful statement to explain why we needed to up our bicycle safety education, because so many more people weren't just biking for fun anymore, but were actually biking to work. So they're on the road every day, Monday through Friday, right? So all kinds of things on the Census Bureau website, right?
Not just poverty and race and ethnicity, although those are very important things to recognize, but a host of other things. Yeah.
Very true. So let's switch over now to health data. The Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC, which is located kind of in Kimberly and more your backyard than mine, but in our backyard.
Well, they have multiple campuses, but the main one is about 5 miles away.
Yep. So they have several data portals, such as data.cdc.gov. They also have their WISQARS tool. That's an acronym. It's WISQARS. That stands for the Web-Based Injury Statistics Query and Reporting System.
Query and reporting.
Thank you. with an interactive data on fatal and non-fatal injuries, violent deaths, and even the economic costs associated with these injuries, which could be helpful if you're doing, related to helping seniors not fall or
Yeah.
traffic related accidents and injuries. Lots of stuff can come out of this, right? As of May 2025, several key data sets and tools are no longer available on the CDC website, unfortunately. But for an alternative, consider several options found at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's website. It's called Better Data for Better Health. And we'll put the exact link because it's really long, so I'm not going to read it out to you, but we'll put that in the show notes. But just know that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has Better Data for Better Health data. It's a great home base for exploring several data tools, including city health, county health and rankings, and the Congressional Health District dashboard. Lots of stuff you can find there.
And again, some of this may be tied, or a lot of it may be tied to CDC data sets, some of which have been taken down or scrubbed. There's youth risk behavior surveillance data, HIV surveillance data, and many other critical data sets that are no longer here. So we just want to point out they may return in the future, but I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. So we want to just highlight the things that, again, as of May 2025, when we're recording this, these data sets were still available. Economic impact data is also just a really critical thing to use in needs statements because it's going to help you quantify problems in dollars and cents, even if you are in an education programming or health and human services. A lot of times, particularly for those kinds of things, the programs may not collect that kind of data necessarily, but if you're working with after school programs, then you can use the school data sets or economic impact data for the geographic community. That's where it's super helpful to have that. It can take you, using economic impact data can take you from, this is bad, access to, seriously, it's like, hunger is bad, lack of childcare is bad too. What is this costing our community? The fact that there's no access to high quality, affordable childcare in this county or in this region or in these 5 neighborhoods. You can use it to quantify, this is costing us, or a recent survey showed this is costing this county $10 million, $20 million a year in productivity because people literally cannot work because they can't put their children in different care systems. So yeah, it's a thing. So there, one that I've used a couple of times, but I want to highlight if you've already heard this, or if you have another economic data subset or data set that you want to let us know about, drop us a line at hello@haydayservices.com. Okay, but this is a good one. That's the National Equity Atlas. And I just want to pause for a second. And if you're being told that you can't use the word equity because, talking about poor people is a bad thing, they're putting this in the name. It's kind of like there's a restaurant in Atlanta, it used to be open on Buford Highway, which is where a lot of folks from all different countries all over the world, there are a lot of businesses directed to that. And there used to be a Korean place called 88 Tofu House. It's in the name. If you don't like tofu, don't come sniffing around. So you're being told, oh my gosh, we can't, for government grants, something called the National Equity Atlas may not be something that you would want to cite because descent into fascism. So I just want to point that out to you, but it's a great site, the National Equity Atlas. There's economic data, there's human and financial costs of not changing policies, which is also a great way to move toward your argument in your needs statement. What is happening that is costing money, but how much more will it cost in terms of economic damage if we don't address it? So you can kind of spin that argument 2 different ways. And again, shout out to the Census Bureau because they've got multiple data sets that include business data, even down to the census tract, although the specificity of the data is going to be linked to how populated that particular area is, right? So So in more rural areas, you may not be able to drill all the way down, but then again, it might be easier to find that data locally or regionally. But don't sleep on the business and economic portions of the US Census Bureau because
Yeah.
lots of great information.
Mm-hmm. So I would say another avenue to look at is some of your local or regional organizations, particularly governmental institutions. Every state is going to be divided into regions, and in some states they call them councils of governments. I know they do in like Texas, for instance. In Georgia, we call them regional development centers, but it's basically the same thing. There are these quasi-governmental agencies that often oversee things like transportation for the region. They usually have an area on aging. And so because of this, they have a lot of data, not shockingly, related to transportation and aging. Sometimes they also do a lot of Homeland Security related funding grants. So they could potentially have data related to crime, victims, just different things like that. So your mileage will vary depending on what your council of government, what services they provide, but they will have data. You also have United Ways that collect data. So if you've got one of those within your community and other large community foundations, I collect data as well. And then also don't forget about your local organizations, right? Your K through 12 public school system probably has a lot of data. I did a Safe Routes to School grant once and needed to know, so we were trying to build sidewalks, right? So I could tell you how many households were along the route, but just because there was a house doesn't mean a kid lived there and went to the elementary school, but that school could help me with those kinds of numbers, right? So I had to reach out and get information that way. Your local health department, your police department, your fire department, a lot of these agencies collect data. A lot of it is publicly available, but they're not going to post it on their website. Most cities are not posting their crime statistics on the website. That's not a thing generally. But you can do an open records request and ask for information. So let's say you're a local nonprofit that's doing some sort of youth after school programming and is trying to, maybe reduce some crimes for children ages 13 to 17. Well, you might need to know what those crimes are or what percentage of children are participating in it, right? Well, what better way to get that is through the police department or maybe even the court system. So you can get that. You're not going to be able to find out it was Johnny on this day, that kind of thing, but knowing numbers, broad scale information is certainly publicly available. So consider reaching out. And that's one of the things too. I always tried to make connections, find if those agencies have grant writers. Those are the folks I wanted to get to know. Because usually, rather than having to go through the whole, process of filling out an open records, I could usually call the grant writer and go, "Hey, I'm working on a grant. I'm trying to prove X, Y, and Z in my needs statement. Can you share that data?" And usually they're like, "Yeah." So then the next time they needed something, they could call me and go, "Hey, I need some police data on X, Y, and Z now." Great, I can get that to you, right? So you making those connections and using them is very helpful.
So another federal source for crime and justice data that I wanted to highlight is the National Crime Victimization Survey, and that's from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. As of May 2025, the information is still there. There were some good oversight data, reports, and infographic kinds of things already built in that was highlighting changes from 1993 to 2023. So that's the most current data. What I like about this and what I've used it to talk about before is that it's not just because of the way the survey is implemented, it gathers information that is more than crime data, although crime data can be very important. It captures information on crimes that weren't necessarily reported to the police because it's like a series of phone interviews. It could include sexual assault, robbery, household property crimes, and it also gathers during the call itself. The NCVS staff will gather demographic information about victims and details that again may not be discernible in standard crime databases. And this kind of data can be really critical if you're trying to demonstrate that certain populations are disproportionately affected by specific kinds of crime, whether it's neighborhood-based or age-based or something like that. So NCVS, a great place to go if you are interested in that kind of information. And again, as of May 2025, still available on the Department of Justice website.
So let's take a left turn here and talk about education data. Where should grant writers go for reliable statistics on educational outcomes, achievement gaps, and school performance? Honestly, you can start locally or at your state level, right? Most states provide report card style data summaries by district and even school for public schools. So it may be harder if you're dealing with a lot of private schools. I'm not sure how that information would be attained, but if you're dealing with public schools, a lot of that information is readily available online. And those report cards share all kinds of information from how many students they're serving and a grade, and they'll break it down how they score and rate different schools based on different types of factors. So that's a great place to start.
So the Department of Education is being gutted and dismantled piece by piece, even as we speak. But I did want to hold up the National Center for Education Statistics, which is can be a real go-to. They do overviews from everything from like enrollment and graduation data to test scores. We'll see how that holds up. And also big shout out to my friends over the Census Bureau. You can also track down some more limited data sets on education over there. But I agree with you, Amanda, really going to state and local for that, for the sort of the testing and the scores. And sometimes those report cards are actually on each school and within given districts are actually issued in the form of report cards with grades.
Yeah.
Not every state has this. And again, it may change in the future, but for right now, I think that's really a great place to go and to kind of figure things out. And also know that if you are working with kids programming and you don't gather that kind of information because your staff is too stretched or for whatever reason, generally you can use those kind of economic and socio-demographic markers around school systems and individual schools as and data on individual schools as kind of markers for economic need or just need in general. For example, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this, but free and reduced price federal breakfast and lunches, again, something that could be going away. But for now, you can at least get retro data from the last year or more about which schools have the different percentages, at different schools for kids who are eligible for those programs. You can use that as an economic marker as well.
Very true. So let's also touch on environmental data sources. And again, this is as of May 2025, but the Environmental Protection Agency has several databases tracking things like air quality, water quality, toxic releases, and climate change indicators. Most states also have their own searchable databases, along with major public and private universities and larger tribal governments such as the Navajo. The Smithsonian also maintains an extensive database that was fully functional at the time of this recording. So lots of different places to go to get environmental information.
So if we've gathered all this information, then you've got to put it in a usable, compelling format, right? And as a grant reviewer, and Amanda, I know you have too, we've seen a lot of times need statements or just this sort of data vomit. It's just statistic after statistic after statistic, and it's like there's no context. It's just a laundry list kind of this is this and this is that. And it's like where you can really make this work for you and make more compelling need statements. First of all, use the most current data available. I don't understand as a grant reviewer if someone is citing data, not research. Now, I'm not talking about academic journals that have published research in a certain area. I'm talking about more of that socioeconomic data that is just available there, or health data, or crime data, or whatever it is. If you're talking about it and the data you're citing is more than 5 years old, as a grant reviewer, I'm kind of like, what you doing? What's up with that? Because using dates and times is essential, right? But it's also can be a sort of a red flag for a reviewer. If your population data, if your crime data, if your educational report cards and things that you're citing are more than 5 years old, that's telling me that you're kind of cherry picking. You might be cherry picking your data a little bit. Because you're maybe choosing a time when maybe rates of certain things were really high or really low, depending on what it is you're measuring.
Yeah.
And I also want to see that comparison, right? If you have current data that you're looking at and say your county's poverty rate is 20% or 36% or something like that, and the national rate might be 11%. You totally want to highlight that and talk about that, right? Because if it's several percentages of points better or worse, particularly worse or higher than the national average for something, or the state average for something, or county or city, if you're drilling down, if you're very place-based in the kinds of programs and services you provide, it's really important to make those comparisons and to provide that context so that the person who's reviewing this document has an idea of the severity of the needs in the communities that you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Another tip is to drill down to subpopulations whenever possible. So, because overall statistics can sometimes mask significant disparities, right? So, for instance, the Census Bureau's data shows differences in poverty rates, educational attainment, and health insurance coverage across different demographic groups. And that can be especially helpful if you are serving a certain type of population. It's one thing to say, I'm making these figures up, but like 20% of our residents don't have a high school diploma. But if the subpopulation you're serving, it's 80%, right? That is, that's the statistic you want to share versus the overall. So as much as you can drill that data down to specifically talk about the population in the community that you're serving, especially, that can, it paints a more clear picture about what's going on.
True. And it can also help to take data and put it either in human terms or comparative data in ways that really bring something home, puts an image in a reviewer's head. I remember one time I want to say it was new diagnoses, maybe it was diabetes or so, it was a healthcare issue, but anyway, it was a large service area. And we're talking about tens of thousands of people for this particular example. And so it dawned on me when I was writing this, I'm like, this is about the size of a small stadium. And so because it was a regional grant to a regional funder, I was like, this is the equivalent of filling up this stadium to the brim, with people who are suffering from this kind of this medical issue or something like that, or busloads or jet planes, or I know you've seen it's used a lot in the news media to make comparisons, but you can totally use it in grants and the need statements every once in a while to really give someone the idea of, particularly if it's a scope kind of thing, So yeah, sometimes my research is like, this stadium in this city, how big is it? How many people will it hold? Or this concert hall, or whatever it might be. When you're looking at defining scope, it can really help. You want to get the numbers in and you want to be precise, but at the same time, you want to paint a compelling picture and help interpret that need in ways that connects to your organization's mission and your proposed solutions. But again, painting that picture can really help people dig into why you're choosing these particular data sets and what it means.
Yeah. So, well, Kimberly talked about how you can use words to help paint those pictures. Another way is to visually represent your data in proposals, whether you're using charts, graphs, tables, maps, whatever. In fact, the Census Bureau offers a visualization tools like their demographic map viewer that can be adapted for your need statements. They have things like simple charts and maps that can make statistical information more accessible and impactful for reviewers. And I find these things super helpful if you have a ton of data to share, because after a while, as you're reading 30% of this and 20% of this and 42% of that, it starts to be, to me, even as a reviewer, to just be a jumble of numbers. But if you've got it in a pie chart or in a graph of some sort, then you can easily grasp, oh, okay, I see what they're talking about here. So I always, and whether you use a tool like this, or heck, in Word, you can create charts and graphs and tools. And so you may just create your own is an option too.
It's true. And we also realize that for a lot of online grant submissions, you can't add these kinds of things. But if you are able to upload a Word document or a PDF document as a part of the narrative, then that would be a good place to use them.
Absolutely.
A lot of times too, when we first started talking about this today, I was talking about how sometimes people sort of data vomit their need statement where it's just, this is this X%, this is this, and you're like, great, what does it mean? So as grant developers, part of what we do is interpret, right? And one way around that, if you to get to that without it being this just laundry list of all sorts of data, is making a data narrative where you're weaving in specific pieces, specific points that you've pulled from these data sets. If you were talking about children overall, you could talk about the children we serve in these 4 neighborhoods. And then you're like bringing in are likely to live in households with medium income of X, are likely to have at Y and go to schools where their overall school grade is X or Y. So you have an anchoring element, and then you're bringing in your different data. I mean, that's a real simple way to look at it, but it can just, particularly if space is limited, you don't have all this room for exposition of all this, then it's like maybe making the population the focus area and then linking in the different data points underneath that could be a way to go. So and it could be multifaceted, right? You could be looking at education data, crime data, food insecurity, health data, or maybe lack of healthcare access or anything like that. So you could draw it in to present this picture, even if your program is not addressing every single one of those. If your program is addressing a part of it, I think it's a good idea to show how these things are all interrelated, right? If you have kids that are unable to graduate from high school, yeah, you want to address that, but there are probably all kinds of other supporting reasons around that. So the need statement can be a way to pull some of that data in and talk about that. Talk about levels of poverty or something like that to bolster your argument.
Yeah. No, and I like that approach, Kimberly, of bringing in all the things. I don't know how many, I've been a handful of times to trainings where they're like, don't share a statistic about a problem that you don't have a solution to fix. And I'm like, yeah, but the problem is we're not like one-sided, right? We're so multifaceted. So I think even if you're doing an education program, it doesn't hurt to talk about health and food insecurity. And because all of those are complicating factors that lead to the problem. And so I think it's okay. Nobody's going to have this. I mean, all of our proposals would be billion-dollar proposals if we were trying to fix everything at once. So I think it's okay. In fact, I think it's smart to share like this is the picture of what's going on, and it's going to include a lot of different things. So, but yeah, it creates that comprehensive picture, that focus of need, rather than just having these isolated statistics. So. And it also demonstrates that your organization has a sophisticated understanding of how all of these factors interact, because they really do.
I'm also use your critical thinking skills. If a trainer is saying, never, ever do this, unless it's something like, don't miss a deadline. I mean, fair.
Yes.
But they're all, if you're writing for a really big private foundation that has lots of infrastructure, lots of subject matter experts, program officers, your ability to present this information in a cohesive way and putting those pieces together, it's going to be a lot different than if you were doing the $1,000 Walmart grant, right, for program support at the end of the year. And there's no shame or shade or anything that I'm casting at anyone. They're just really different. And there are times when you do need to show interrelation. And there are times when there's literally not the space for it. And y'all are smart and you know that. But I also just want to point that out. I'm also not a big fan of absolutist teaching and training. Unless it's like brain surgery. Straight up, I want them to know, straight up. There's one good way to solve this issue in someone's brain. But this is not brain surgery. Yeah. So pointing that out. Also, just quick shout out to another common sense thing that I'd like to restate. You want to, sometimes the questions that are in a grant application are super vague, like describe the target population, describe the need. Okay. And so a lot of the things that we were talking about and what we're getting ready to talk about will tie into that. But also, please, y'all, if they're being real specific, make sure that if they're asking for graduation rates or crime data or whatever it is, if they're asking for specific data, provide that first.
Mm-hmm.
And then if there's space left over, you weave things in. I mean, we're not saying write a novel when someone just wanted an email. That's not what we're saying. We're saying use your brain and look at that. But make sure you're hitting if they ask for specific data points, hit them and then weave other things in as space allows, right?
Yeah.
Because again, if there is no direction, then we can get into that data vomit scenario where it's just dumping and it's overwhelming and it also doesn't really paint a picture. It's just a series of numbers with no context.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, Amanda, do you have some recommendations for folks around that, how they could sort of navigate?
I think it's a combination of being selective and strategic about what you're sharing and understanding how much space you have, right? Because you've got those proposals where you have 500 words to answer what is the need. And you've also got some where you have 5 pages to share that. And then you may be able to go into depth. But you're right, even if you have 5 pages, you don't want 5 pages of nothing but statistic, number, because that doesn't mean anything. And so I think the smartest thing is to pick the 3 to 5 that are the most impactful. And again, if the answer is 7, there's 7 things that need to be said, fine, then put your 7 things in. Don't go, well, Amanda said only 3 to 5, but 3 to 5 is a nice way to share a lot of information, but not overwhelm a reviewer with just nothing but stats. So, and again, as long as what you're sharing demonstrates the need and then you have a program that ties into that shows how you're going to help with especially what that main need of that you're talking about is.
Yeah, that's fair. Something else that can be sort of the bane of my own personal existence, footnotes. I'm just,
Same.
but if you're writing a larger state or federal grant, that you're going to need to provide those.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say, and if they don't prescribe a certain style like Chicago or APA or something like that, just pick one and be consistent about it. But really where this comes in, what I really want to say too, is if you're writing to private funders and it's an online portal and there just may not be room for a citation, then, that's time to trot out according to a recent Harvard Medical School study or according to Tufts University or according to the US Census Bureau. You can just sprinkle that in for these really tight, limited need statements that might be in portals or wherever it may be, where you have a word or character count and you just can't talk about the date and time. But regardless of whether the actual footnote makes it into the proposal narrative, just keep a list of them. Just keep a list of them because you might be asked. I've been asked before to provide it, and because I cited a study that, again, it was a medically based insurance company based foundation, and they were like, "Oh, the funder was like, oh, program officer rather was, I haven't heard of this yet. Would you mind forwarding it to me?" And because I kept a list, I could do that. Now I could have gone and found it again, but who wants to be sweating out the Google scramble where you're trying to remember where you found this thing? You could create a bookmark page, you could note them, you could write it down, although why would you? Whatever it is that you might need to do to just record everything. Think of it as almost like a bibliography that you may have prepared, in middle school, high school, or maybe college classes where you're like, here are all the sources I consulted, just to have it, but also makes it easier the next time you're writing this if you do have to provide footnotes, or if you found more data than you could include in this shorter proposal, well, there's probably going to be a longer one, and you won't have to recreate the wheel to go and find it.
Yep, very true. I'd also like to add that don't feel like you always have to go to other sources and other publicly available data. Your agency may have data that's fabulous, right? You could have program data, intake forms, assessments that can provide powerful statistics showing need for your community. When I worked in local government, like I'd say 99% of my data, especially when I was writing for like our police and fire departments, they had the data specifically for our city, right? Could I go to the FBI's website or justice websites? Maybe it could be helpful if the national averages of things were, not as bad off as in our community, then I could do those comparisons, but they're not going to have the drilled down data like my own police department had when it came to things like number of DUI related accidents and breaking and entering autos and different things like that, right? So don't overlook your own agency as having some really targeted data that is specific to your community. So it's a good resource.
As in most things, I 100% agree with you, Amanda. Yeah, I mean, I know we disagree about grits, but we're just going to leave that for now. And focus on the key thing here is that, yes, if you have parent surveys, client surveys, any internally gathered information, combining that with data that you've gotten from external sources can really, really help paint the kind of picture that your community deserves when you're trying to find grant funding.
The ultimate goal is to use data to tell a clear and convincing story about why your program is needed and why it deserves funding. And this data should present that irrefutable case for why the funder should invest in your solution. So that's the whole point of the need statement.
Right. It's just you're using solid evidence to demonstrate that a problem exists and that your organization understands it deeply, and that you then are using the rest of the proposal to talk about your response to that.
Thanks again to today's sponsor, S&F Writing Solutions. If you want to learn more about all that Stacy and her team offers in terms of resources, coaching, and writing services, visit their website at snfwritingsolutions.com.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you found our deep dive into data sources helpful, practical, useful. It's not the most fast-paced, laugh-filled episode we've ever done, but I think it's important to share this information. I think it's important for all of us to share information, particularly now when so much information is being changed, withheld, or just wiped off the record completely.
Absolutely. And if you want more details about any of the resources we mentioned, check out our show notes at HayDayServices.com, where we'll include links to all the data sources we discuss. You just need to find this episode on our website.
True that. And if you're like, I don't have time to comb through webisodes on websites, webisodes.
Is that like Spider-Man? He creates episodes.
You don't have time if you're Spider-Man costumes at the dry cleaners and you just don't have time to do all this. Sign up for our newsletter. It's HayDay Hot Takes, and you can just go to our website, HayDayServices.com, HayDay services.com, and the sign up is at the bottom and the top of all the web pages. Spidey senses tingling or no, it's there for you.
That it is. We're so honored you chose to spend time with us today. In 2 weeks, we are speaking with Cam St. Omer Donaldson, who is the head of membership engagement and relationships at Fundraising Everywhere. If you don't know about this amazing organization, then let us introduce you. See y'all soon.
Bye.